The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. I'll be joined today by HASA CEO Chris Brink. We're going to talk about, of course, this 2021 season and the shortage. And we're going to talk specifically also about the 2022 season and what to expect. We're also going to cover other aspects of HASA, including their education and their new liquid feeder. So I think you'll find this podcast educational as well as reassuring as we talk about the next season and the availability of chlorine going into 2022. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Also receive priority service, enhanced rebate programs, a discount on your general liability insurance through SPA, a discount on your pool routing software through Skimmer, and an opportunity to co-brand with Leslie's on your social media, website, truck, and more. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. So I'm joined today by Chris Brink, who is the CEO of HASA. How you doing today, Chris?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so we want to go over your role over there with HASA. Of course, you're the CEO, but what do you actually do there? And what's your history in the industry, your background?
What does a CEO do? It's kind of a hard job to explain sometimes. At the end of the day, the way I look at the company is that I am the employee of all 450, 500 HASA folks. And my job is to make their job easier, to work collectively to get great products to the market each and every day in the best way possible and create value for our customers. So it's a fun job because it allows me to pick and choose each and every day where we can probably do our best to smooth things out or create more value. But it's a hard to describe job because it literally is everything from go visit the Pittsburgh plant and figure out how we get them more pallet wrappers and get them in time to think about, where are we going to take the company next as we continue our march towards the East Coast and maybe even globally someday. So I've been doing jobs like this for a variety of companies, always in the materials industry, ever since I started back in the lab back in the 90s. So I started out as an R&D guy, and then I worked for a large concern called the Dow Chemical Company for about 8 years, where I learned not only to sell chemicals, but also to add value and really be in what we call the specialty chemicals space. Learned how to run businesses at Dow. Was a great time in my life. And then really since about 2010, I've been working for a variety of privately owned companies, owned by various private equity firms in a variety of materials, and almost always stuff where there's a pro contractor or a pro user involved, whether it be roofing or insulation or now sodium hypochlorite for pool professionals.
So HASA's been around for a long time on the West Coast, and I know you're expanding HASA. The history of the company is really interesting. It was privately owned for many years, and I kind of like to equate HASA with In-N-Out Burger because they're a West Coast kind of burger place and that they're expanding kind of out towards the east now. I think they're all as far as parts of Texas now, and even maybe even further. And so I think HASA has that similar goal. So what is the history behind HASA, and what's the 2022 season and beyond look like for HASA, getting out to locations where the liquid returnable cases are coveted and people want that service? So what does that look like from HASA's end?
I mean, that's a great question. That's a very exciting question to answer. I love the In-N-Out Burger analogy because folks that are on the West Coast know what it is and they know why they love it, and they all want it their own specific way too. Just like I like my double animal style, right? So, and that's code for West Coast people. They all know what that means. But we definitely are expanding. Texas has been a really interesting roller coaster, but an interesting and fun journey. We've got an amazing team out there and an amazing facility. We just opened a secondary facility in Dallas. I think that is a market where folks for many years have used, I would say, less beneficial technologies like Cal Hypo, really leaned on the tab a lot And now this year, because of all those shortages caused by the tab plant fire last year, I think pros are thinking in a very open-minded way about looking at other ways to sanitize pools, and they're seeing the advantages of sodium hypochlorite in the clarity, the look, the skin feel of the pool, the fact that you can swim 7 days a week. You don't have to kind of shut your pool down for a day while you wait for the cal hypo to dissipate and dissolve and so forth. They're seeing the advantages. And then since this is a coast to coast broadcast, not everybody feels exactly the same way about the returnable container, but I'm a Midwestern guy, now a California transplant, and I'm a believer in the idea that every time we make a bottle, we're using it at least 30 times before we then responsibly make sure it is recycled. And when I look in times of tight supply chain and think about the fact that we're probably going to save about 27 million bottles from going into landfills this year, I think that's the right thing to do. And by the way, we're doing it, and it's the most cost-effective solution. So when people realize, as they are in Texas, it's less expensive, it gives you a better result. And by the way, you're helping the environment, sort of, whether you're an environmentalist or not, you're helping the environment inadvertently. Oh, by the way, you're getting a product that's easier to get, because it's a lot easier for me to buy, 1 million bottles and use them 30 times than it is for me to buy 30 million bottles. So that resolves a supply chain issue. People are starting to get it. Unfortunately, it's through hardship that everybody's figuring it out. But fortunately, I think we're seeing a real transformation in the way people think about sanitization of their pools, the daily sanitization, not just the shocking. I maybe got a little far afield on my answer there, but
yeah. And then the HASA, the background of HASA as a private company, I think really plays well into the fact that they were connected already with the pool pro and with the industry, kind of on a personal level. They weren't a corporate entity to begin with, and so the history of that, I think, is really important too. The listeners should know that HASA's been around for a while, and they still have that kind of mentality of a mom and pop kind of organization, maybe on a higher level.
Absolutely. I mean, every day. First of all, HASA is not just one person, and HASA is not just what I say it should be. It's 450 people collectively getting up every morning. It's a culture, and it's a culture that I have inherited, and a culture that I continue to kind of shape. It's really a culture centered on the end user, the customer, doing a good job, working hard, and the pro. None of that has changed. If anything, we further reinforce that. We have every one of our plants has a poster on the wall, and we call it the reverse org chart. At the top of our organization, and this is not just pablum, this is really how we run the company. At the top of our organization is the customer, and then everything goes down from there. And at the base of the organization, supporting everybody else between me and the customer, is me and the leadership team, and then our current ownership. And there are some myths about private equity. Private equity is private ownership too. It just happens to be people who have gathered money and work with banks maybe a little bit more deftly than sometimes a private entrepreneurial owner do. But private equity has all of the great hallmarks, when it's done right, of an entrepreneurial, family-owned, caring organization. And the folks that we work with today are gentlemanly. They care. When we looked at them before COVID and said it's going to cost the company, north of $1 million for us to create sort of, weekly subsidies for our employees because they now have a spouse at home or their kids are at home and so forth, and we need to help pay for meals and make sure that they all have a laptop so they could go to school from home. That wasn't the government telling us what to do. That was our private owners saying, yeah, that's the right thing to do for our people. And it was not a 4-hour conversation. It was a 15-minute conversation, and they all nodded yes, this is the right thing to do. So people often have misconceptions about private equity. These are caring people who want to do the right thing for the company, our customers, our people, all these other things like the environment and societies that we participate in. And by the way, because it's good business. So
I agree with you there. I think if you run the company correctly, it's no different, who is behind the scenes there. Let's jump into probably one of the things that people want me to talk about and why I have you on here. Is this season there was a lot of shortages. And now this is not just the pool industry. I was out shopping for furniture. I asked the guy in the furniture store, when is the couch going to be available? He said, well, we don't really know. It could be on a container. It could come in November, December. We don't even know what's on the container. So the furniture industry, the paint industry, lumber, the shortages extend to other industries, but doesn't really help the pool pro who's going looking for chlorine and it's not in stock. And maybe it'll help a little bit, as the furniture store guy was explaining why the couch isn't here in a warehouse. It kind of helped me understand the situation. But for the pool pro out there who this season was searching around driving to 3 or 4 different suppliers looking for chlorine, what were some of the reasons why it wasn't in the store, just to keep it basic? Why wasn't it there when they showed up there to get their chlorine like it was last season?
Everybody kind of, you like to throw around, people like to throw on terms, buy low, sell high, and supply demand and all that. We are living as Americans today in the reality of a supply demand crunch. I was just at Best Buy this weekend. Love Best Buy. I go there with my son. We kick around, we look at stuff. And it was amazing to me how empty some of the shelves were at Best Buy, right? And it's amazing to me, even though I'm living in the middle of it as somebody who runs a company, it's everything, to your point. I would say chlorine has just been exceptionally tight because the reality, and then the question becomes, where have people gotten their chlorine? Because I've heard, there was a lot of concern. A lot of people were very, very worried. When we did the math early in the season, it looked like there was going to be enough to get to the industry. I'll tell you, I don't know if you have heard differently. A lot of people were worried about their businesses, but of the, say, 10,000 pros we touch, we've not heard of one person that's actually gone out of business for want of chlorine. It's been painful. They've had to try a lot of different tricks to keep pools running. They've had to go and get creative on where they're getting it from. They've gotten creative on what kind of sanitizer they're using. But the reality is we're kind of squeaking by, kind of like Indiana Jones pulling his hat out under the door at the last minute. I think we're squeaking by what will, in my view, be the hardest summer that the industry's had in definitely in the 3-4 years I've been in the business, but in the last 2 decades, as far as I could hear anybody talk about it. I think we're going to squeak by, and I think we're all going to make it. And if anything, as the season eases off a little bit, there will be more and more liquid as well as other types of chlorine available, but primarily liquid will be available. And there's going to be, I think, definitely plenty by September, October, and November.
So it wasn't just a supply problem. It was all the other factors that everyone's facing, drivers, containers, things like that. Everything is made here, but like actual physical materials of putting the chlorine in. I know a lot of suppliers didn't even have buckets for their products. There's been a muriatic acid shortage, and how does that tie in with the chlorine shortage? That's something that kind of was not even on the radar of anybody, where the muriatic acid, not just the HASA one, but every company's muriatic acid was in short supply. You want to touch on that? How did that happen at the same time there's a chlorine shortage?
Ultimately, muriatic acid is hydrochloric acid. So the key word there is chlor, right? It means hydrochloric acid has chlorine in it. So all chlorine is coming from what's called the chloralkali process, where you essentially take salt, you make salt water, you put it through kind of a reverse battery, you use power, and you separate into 2 molecules, really 3, but 2, caustic and chlorine. You also get hydrogen off of that process. And then that chlorine goes to a million different processes, anything from vinyl siding all the way through to advanced sort of precursor molecules used for drug discovery and drug manufacture, all the way through to some of it is runoff as hydrochloric acid. Some is runoff as it becomes a phosgene and goes into the polyurethane supply chain. So chlorine goes a lot of different places, and then finally goes into rail cars, goes around the country, and goes to companies like HASA, who then combine it back with caustic, with sodium hydroxide, and make bleach. And then we make bleach, as I had mentioned to you maybe earlier before we talked, for everything from making safe drinking water, which honestly, and I don't think there's a pro who would disagree, has to be our first priority, is to make sure people's drinking water supplies remain safe, clean, and clear. But then all the way through to a variety of applications, including our beloved swimming applications. So it is a complicated series of supply relationships on how chlorine either becomes hydrochloric acid or gets to us as elemental chlorine, becomes sodium hypochlorite, or goes to other guys, becomes cal hypo, or goes to other guys, becomes trichlorotab. Chlorine finds its way into a million different places. Things that affect hydrochloric acid are supply-demand relationships that in many ways are related to Permian Basin fracking, oil recovery, things like that. HCl goes into a lot of applications. And depending on the supply demand there, it can be sucked up pretty fast, depending on how the economy is rolling. And I think when the economy came rolling back, a lot of HCl got taken off the market fast, and people were willing to pay virtually any price. And as we know, pros, we've been trying to be very respectful of how and when we ask for more pricing at market, and have been very clear about not putting any price out during the season, the belly of the season at least. I mean, if the oil guys need HCl, they're going to buy it. They're going to buy it at any price, whether it's June, July, or January. So a lot of that's going on and sucked a lot of HCl out of the market.
And I think if we want to back up a little bit, and a silver lining of all this is that a lot of pool pros haven't raised their rates on their customers in maybe 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. And since, of course, all of the chlorine products went up, tablets, the cost of those skyrocketed, along with other chlorine products, we were forced to raise our rates on our customers probably for the first time in a while. Since everything else is so high in the market, everywhere you go, there's price increases. It went over really well. So I guess if you're looking for a silver lining in all of this, it allowed the pool pro to kind of approach the customer and say, hey, look, we're having an industry-wide supply shortage. Things cost more. We're going to have to raise your rate. And so I think in that aspect, it did help a lot of companies. I mean, it was painful not finding the chlorine and not having it available. But at the same time, I kind of like to look at the positive aspects of things like this. And for a lot of guys, they're happy that they're able to raise their rates. Maybe not enough. They did get an increase, especially in California, where the rates are extremely low to begin with.
We did a study of pool owners before all this happened for some other reasons. The price of the service is the number 4 thing for the average pool owner, well beyond convenience, well beyond the look of their pool, and safety is actually the number 1 thing that the consumer cares about, was what we were able to find. So to the extent that emboldens pros out there to be paid what they deserve to be paid for the good service they're providing, I think that's always a good message. And, the other side of that, there's always what you charge for your service, but then there's also how effectively you run your business. I started to say this on another podcast, and I know it's not the most popular thing to tell people to conserve, but conservation really is the right thing to do. And by the way, people are going to see when they look at the number of pools they had, the number of gallons they managed, and the amount of actual chlorine they had to use. I think people are going to see that they were able to get by with less. In the long run, this year's going to be bumpy and has a lot of turbulence, but in the long run, that makes for a more effective business. Our estimation now, based upon things we're seeing, is that probably more than 20 to 30% of the chlorine used is being wasted for a variety of reasons. There's an opportunity through this hardship for pros to really tighten up their businesses, and frankly, we think in the coming years be more profitable than ever.
I think you hit on a good point there, because when the supply is plentiful and you go to your truck and you have 12 gallons of chlorine, adding an extra gallon at Mr. Jones' house, not a big deal. Whether they need it or not, you had it on your truck, you put it in there. And so you make a good point about that. Another thing that I'd like to address is that I talked to my sources in the industry, and they do a lot of purchasing in the off season. And one of them said in particular that they expect about 30% more chlorine next season. They also expect the prices of the trichlor to remain at the level they're at now. They also expect the biolab factory not to be online until spring of 2022. People probably don't even know what the biolab thing was before last year when there was a shortage. But that factory was basically the largest producer of trichlor. And so all these factors going into 2022, what's HASA doing to ensure, you mentioned the supply problem with the actual base product for your chlorine and acid. What is HASA going to do for 2022 when my sources say there's going to still be a shortage of some kind next season?
When we talk about chlorine and chlorine sufficiency, I think the first note is it's been hard to get, and it wasn't all coming from the same place, but it looks as if there actually was enough chlorine to get through the season. That's going to sound weird because people may have to go to 2 or 3 distributors or go pick some up from Walmart or do whatever they had to do to get it. There was actually enough molecule out there to get through this season. It just wasn't all in the same place for a lot of reasons that would bore your audience, I think, to hear about. But what will happen next year is everyone's going to be a lot more organized more likely you'll be able, if SCP is your favorite distributor, you're going to be able to do one stop at SCP and not have to go over and pick some up over at Target or hope that Home Depot has some, or fiddle around with a tab one day and a bottle of liquid the next day. The math we did suggested we would be able to get through this season without trouble. The only thing that really threw a wrinkle in the works, other than the labor market issue, which is broadly an issue for everyone, was that one of the manufacturers of the elemental chlorine on the West Coast went into force majeure. They shut down their plant for about 3 weeks. So we had rail cars in the pipeline that actually carried us through up until about like maybe 5 days of July. We had about 5 days where we didn't have rail cars coming in. We had a real stutter step in July. I mean, those are kind of black swan events. We're not planning for that to happen again. But at the same time, we've also shored up our supply chain so that if something like that happens, maybe we have a few more rail cars on the road. We have a little bit more diverse supply chain partners and so forth. So, we're fully ready for another 20 to 30% demand next year over what we're seeing this year. We've got a lot of stuff in play. And a lot of times those capital investments take years. We started some of the capital investments last October, knowing that this would be a tough season, and they just didn't fully come to fruition because of some of these other shortages in the supply chain. But we've got a lot in play, and unlike the fire you referred to, those guys had a lot of eggs in one basket because tab plants are really expensive to build. We have a diverse number of manufacturing facilities across the West Coast, and we're going to continue to do that. So we have certain areas where we have a concentration of manufacturing, and we're going to continue to work on that. But in most cases, we have plants that can help one another all up and down the West Coast. And indeed, we did a lot of shipping of molecule up and down the West Coast in order to try to keep people at least in some juice, despite how crazy the demand was.
So you think in 2022, you mentioned that you're going to have a better way of getting chlorine to the supplier so that you're not running around to 3 or 4 different locations. But the supply itself, you see it as better than this year? I mean, I know that you mentioned some factors that cause some shortages, so we'll be okay next year as far as liquid chlorine goes.
It didn't feel this way to the pro because demand was so off the chain. We actually shipped more so far this year to date, than we ever have in the history of the company, significantly more. We're on track to ship significantly more next year than we ever have in the history of the company. And the only months that we really were suffering were, I would say, in full legitimacy, maybe June and July. August is already looking much better. September is going to be fine in our view. Let's say other issues notwithstanding, no hurricanes and so forth. Make sure we get plenty of caustic. We had 2 months that were tighter than we expected, and it was really, really attributable to this force majeure event on chlorine on the West Coast. Assuming there's not another event like that, we'll have a much smoother summer next year.
Good to know because people are worried already about next season because this was pretty brutal for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So with the trichlor shortage probably continuing into next season and everything at all-time high prices, 2 years ago, actually a year and a half ago, you can get a 50-pound bucket of tablets for $78 wholesale. And with Cal Hypo tablets also still being very expensive, the other option would be some way to get the liquid chlorine in there. And we know that liquid chlorine won't last the whole week in a lot of cases because you lose about 1 part per million per day.
Mm-hmm.
So the HASA liquid feeders, you have 2 feeders now on the market. What would be some of the benefits of going with a liquid chlorine feeder over paying, so much for trichlor or Cal Hypo tablets?
Mm-hmm.
And, from your standpoint, you're talking to the pool pro here who's looking for an alternative over those 2. What about the HASA liquid feeders as the primary way of putting the chlorine in the pool?
Yeah, so the HASA liquid, thanks for asking me to speak about that. The HASA liquid feeder is very cool. It's simple. I kind of liken it to versus fuel injection. It's kind of like a carburetor because it is a very simple piece of equipment, easy to maintain. Just like I can fix the carburetor on my 75 Monte Carlo, but I cannot fix the fuel injector on my other car. Somebody can walk in there in 20 minutes, you can install one, and in 10 minutes or less, you can maintain one. The cool thing about that device, where it makes sense to put it in, is that it operates based upon the Venturi effect of your existing pump system. The other cool thing is it holds 50-50 water, 50% water and 50% sodium hypo that you're going to pour in. So let's say you're using our sodium hypo, which we recommend at 12.5 or 12.9%. As soon as you add it to the tank, you're going to cut the concentration in half. That slows down the degradation curve of the sodium hypochlorite significantly. The lower the concentration, the slower sodium hypochlorite degrades. So you can put, in some cases, up to 2 weeks supply of sodium hypo into that tank, and it's going to be sufficient to sanitize the pool for up to 2 weeks without having to add any more. So we like it for that reason, so convenience and simplicity. The other reason why it works is when you can really dial it in, and we're using right now, we're using that Sutro equipment in a lot of our beta testing to really look at the real chlorine titration in the pool 3 times a day. Boy, if you can get that thing dialed in to 2 to 3 ppm, 2 ppm, you're going to find you're conserving a lot of chlorine on a day-to-day basis. And if you're doing that versus using tabs, you put in, say, 30 ppm of CYA, cyanuric acid, into the pool, and you're no longer using tabs and you're getting on that reverse treadmill where you're always chasing the cyanuric acid content, you're going to find you use a lot less chemical on a year-to-year basis. We've done some of the studies and the math, and if the average pool pro, 100 pool guy is spending between $5,000 and $6,000 a year on chemical, we think that this versus using tabs can save anywhere from $800 up to $1,500 a year on chemical just by dialing in, controlling how much sodium hypo is going into the pool. Plus, the pool will look better. We've got a lot of really positive results from this.
So I go back to the supply issue. At the beginning of the season, probably in May, pretty much all the HASA liquidators were out of stock because guys were, of course, grabbing those up as a alternative to trichlor. Now going into 2022, you have your new liquid feeder. How does that look as far as, you walk into Leslie's or your SCP location and you go to pick one up? Is it going to be there in the store for the Pool Pro next season to move to the liquid feeder?
There will be. We can make about 500 a day with our current manufacturing partner. We're not making them at that rate yet because we've kind of held off on launching them. Every time we talk about the HLF, some pro pops out of a cake and yells at me about not supplying enough hypo to start with. So we've been kind of quiet about launching the HLF this summer, but you're going to see them start to show up at your favorite distributor, or perhaps even at your favorite retailer or LPM, Leslie's Pool Mart, here September, October.
Okay, perfect. Because I think that's going to be the key. Is if you have those available, people will put them in. They're a great way to sanitize the pool versus the trichlor. Because we didn't talk about this, but I've talked with Terry Arco about this. The side effects of adding a lot of trichlor to the pool with the cyanuric acid and the cal hypo with the calcium. So liquid chlorine, I think, as far as every chlorine has the byproduct, and I would say liquid chlorine has the most tolerable byproduct of the chlorine types. And I mentioned Terry Arco. I do a lot of podcasts with Bob Lowry. And so HASA is moving towards focusing on more education in the industry. You mentioned off air that HASA does a lot more than just the pool industry. About half your business is outside the industry. But for the pool industry, I think HASA is going to have a new focus on education because I think there is a lack of education. You mentioned earlier, too, about overusing chlorine, not knowing how to measure it properly. And so you're wasting a lot of product. And that goes to the basic education of how much chlorine a pool actually needs to be sanitized with to be safe. You want to talk briefly about HASA's focus on education coming up in the next season and beyond that, because I think it's really a service to the industry that HASA is focusing and using their resources to educate the pool pro.
Yeah, so we're very excited to announce that we're now partnering with Bob Lowry's company, PCTI. We essentially acquired all of their intellectual property a couple of months ago, and we're going to be working to make that much, much more broadly available to the industry. I came into the industry 3 years ago. I've got a background in chemistry. I've got a background in the sciences. I was an industrial chemist. It was amazing to me how complicated pool chemistry can be. And it was also amazing to me how complicated pool chemistry has been made to be, maybe doesn't have to be. I'm a big believer in the pro, and I'm a big believer in the value that a pro provides in maintaining a safe swimming environment. So we are doubled down with this investment in getting those pros the best knowledge available to run, to make sure those pools are run efficiently, They're run for triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. And they're run so that those businesses can run more efficiently, because we're all for helping, we reach as HASA 10,000 or so pool pros. We want to help the 30 to 40,000 pool pros across the country eventually just be a very profitable, very effective specialty business that people feel like they can't live without. That's where we want to get that. We want to help pros to get. And the education effort, we're happy to spend the money to get the most professional, clean, and simple education tools out there possible. And by the way, they're agnostic to chemistry. Sodium hypochlorite happens to win on the story on many of those things, but we're not here to tell you only use sodium hypo. We'll tell you how to use every type of product available. We'll put it into context, as Bob Lowry always did, and will continue to do in partnership with HASA. And pros will make their own choice about what they want to use. We know that the economics and the clarity and the safety and the environmental mandate all favor sodium hypo. So we know in the long run it's going to be a good thing for HASA.
You want to give the listeners your website so they can go look up HASA. There's already a lot of stuff on there they can look at to kind of help them. And there's also data sheets on some of the things we talked about the chlorine shortage. And they can go there and read those at their leisure. What's the website?
It's www.hasa.com. You can also put hasapool.com in there, because either one will send you to us. Those of you who are loyal users of HASA products, I would encourage you to download our app. It's available on the Apple Store. That app is not only going to give you access to our educational materials, it's pretty cool. You can scan your invoices, and it's going to immediately give you credits and all sorts of goodies in exchange for your HASA purchases. So we're actually going to pay you to get access to our educational materials, plus HASA swag, cool stuff, discount coupons, and whatever else.
And I should mention that my son's a big fan of HASA. You guys ordered a ton of keychains from him, different types. Whenever anyone says anything about HASA, he's like, "What are they saying about HASA?" He's like, always on that,
That was yeah, and I honestly, I got to know your family through your son first. I love that story. I love to see it showed up in. I was surprised to see your son's story show up in on the back page of Aqua this month. But I rolled into the office. I sat down at my desk and I saw these two cool keychains sitting on my desktop. I said, "What are these?" And I heard the story. Oh yeah, there's this young man that went on his own steam and designed them. And I said, "Okay, we'll take 1,000." And they said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, just I don't know who this guy is, whatever. Tell him we'll take 1,000 and we'll see where it goes." And I will tell you, everybody from the guys that are on our board to our distributors, they fidget with those things. Everybody loves to play with those keychains, and they'll be available. They will be available through our app. You'll be able to get them if you want to trade in some HASA points. So let your son know he better buy some more 3D printers. Keep the business rolling.
I will let him know. And just as a side note, he's saving all his money up because his goal is to, when he turns driving age, to have a Tesla. So,
oh really?
So I told him, whatever car he wants, we'll pay half. He pays the other half. And so he's like, "Well, I'm going to get a Tesla then." So he's working hard on that. And so we'll see where that goes.
Well, he's got a job at HASA as soon as he gets out of college. You let him know that.
Yeah, I will. So I appreciate your time, and I think you really helped kind of reassure. I think that's the reason why I wanted to get you on here, is for reassurance in 2022, because I'm getting a lot of pool guys that are even panicking or worried about it.
Yeah.
And so I think this reassures them that you don't really have to spend all your money on inventory this off season, because there's going to be chlorine, maybe not to the level of 2 or 3 years ago, but not to a level where people are going to the store and buying all the toilet paper, like during the beginning of COVID.
It's going to be much better next year than it is this year, just as it's better this month than it was last month. But, I guess I'd throw this one out there. Go to your favorite distributor or go to your favorite supply partner and lay out a strategy with them right now. These folks want to partner with the pros that are loyal to them and say, "Hey, how are we going to work through next year? Let's sit down and talk about it." When it's quiet, when it's October, when things are a little bit slower, lay out a strategy. And then I am going to make a commitment as HASA. We're going to sit with all the major distributors, all of our favorite retailers, all of the mom and pops that we've been doing business with forever. We're going to lay out strategies with them. So they're going to have more to share with the pro than they did last year. We're all going to be able to kind of have a clear-eyed vision of how we're going to get through the season together, those distributors, those retailers are going to be able to say, hey, okay, well, we think we'll have this much in terms of tabs. We think we'll have this much in terms of liquid. Oh, by the way, maybe we've got, HASA liquid feeders to give you or whatever. And you guys can start to lay in, I say you guys to the pro community, start to lay in a plan for next year, and it's going to be much smoother. And no better time than now, whether it's a HASA liquid feeder or, a blue-white pump or, one of the other fine many control devices that are out there. Now is a great time to go talk to your pool owners and talk about how do you upgrade their technology to a liquid delivering system of some sort. I think there's going to be a lot of value to that, and it's going to provide a revenue stream. It's equipment that will be available even when a lot of equipment's not, and it's a great off-season project to be working on, which, by the way, is going to result in a cleaner pool that's better for the environment. So, and will be less expensive to service. So I think there are a lot of wins out there to be captured now that we're getting through the season. If everybody can sort of just be, take a deep breath and figure out how do we win next year together.
Yeah, and I think, again, focusing on the positive, the shortage really made people think about their business model moving forward, what they're actually putting in people's pools. And so I think there's some good that came out of it. If you want to try to find something positive, that pool pros never looked at their business model. They just filled up the floater with tablets and moved on to the next pool. And same with homeowners. They never thought about how they're sanitizing their pool. Silver lining, maybe not something people want to hear, but I think you got to stay positive in situations to get the best outcome. I appreciate your time again, and thanks for, the reassurance that HASA has the pros back going into 2022, and you did the best you could in 2021, as you explained it. So I don't think anyone's going to hold it against HASA, because everyone had the same situation, and I think HASA really bent over backwards in a lot of situations to get that liquid to the pro. I mean, I went to my local Leslie's and they had the disposable HASA liquid there. That's all they can get, and they went out and purchased it so that they would have liquid for the pro. So I think HASA went above and beyond, try to get their product there. So again, I appreciate your time, and thank you for taking the time to come out here and talk to the pro.
Hey, it was fun and a thoughtful conversation, and I have all the time in the world for conversations like this because it's what our customers deserve.
So I hope you found this helpful in kind of explaining where the shortage came from. The gist of it, I think I got from the conversation with Chris Brink, is that the base ingredient of chlorine, kind of like flour for the donut shop, the pizza parlor, the tortilla factory, let's say there was a shortage of flour, and depending on what your preference is, let's say you want the flour to go to making donuts, then, if there's a shortage, the donut prices are going to go up. And of course, donuts will be in shorter demand. And in a way, I think Chris touched on the fact of, we have to kind of watch our supply. And in that same respect, do you actually need 3 donuts? Can you live with just 2 donuts? And that's kind of what I got out of the conversation, is that there was a lot of factors causing the shortage. And going forward, I think HASA is going to definitely shore things up, and other chemical suppliers will shore things up to avoid the situation, because it's pretty hectic when you can't find chlorine, when all the suppliers put signs out in front with no chlorine, no dichlor, no cal hypo, no liquid, no trichlor, and basically they don't have anything. So that's very frustrating industry wide. And again, I hope that you found it helpful to hear directly from HASA about why there was a shortage of chlorine this season, and hopefully you'll feel more confident going into 2022. And if you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, I mentioned Terry Arco and Bob Lowry in this podcast. I have several podcasts with both of them. If you go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, click on the banner, there's a podcast icon. Click on that, and that will take you to my site. And then you can search in the search box. You can type in Bob Lowry or Terry Arco, and that'll take you to the podcast I recorded with both of them. And there's a lot of great information on liquid chlorine as your primary sanitizer, plus the other effects of the other chlorines we didn't address in this podcast here, but you can certainly find those on my site. And if you're in the industry and you want to enhance your business, definitely check out my coaching program at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.